The whispers of Durango, Colorado carried on the autumn breeze like tumbleweeds, each one cutting deep into Lydia Sinclair's heart as she made her way down the dusty Main Street in October of 1878. People averted their eyes or stared too long when they thought she wouldn't notice, their judgments as heavy as the extra pounds she carried on her frame. At 22, Lydia had learned to make herself as small as possible despite her size, hunching her shoulders and keeping her gaze fixed on the ground before her boots. "Watch where you're going, Miss Sinclair," Mr. Peterson barked as she accidentally brushed against a barrel outside his general store. "Nearly knocked over my display." "I'm sorry," she murmured, stepping quickly aside, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Lydia had come to Durango 3 months prior, after her parents had died of influenza back east in Boston. Her Aunt Martha, her only living relative, had reluctantly taken her in, but made it clear that Lydia was expected to earn her keep at Martha's boarding house on the edge of town. The boarding house was a modest 2-story structure with 8 rooms for rent, mostly occupied by men passing through on their way to mining claims or cattle operations. Lydia cooked, cleaned, and did the laundry, working from before sunrise until well after sunset. The work was exhausting, but at least it gave her purpose. What it didn't give her was any respite from the loneliness that had followed her all the way from Boston. As she pushed open the door to Dawson's Mercantile, the little bell jingled, announcing her arrival. Mr. Dawson glanced up from his ledger, his face impassive as she approached the counter. "Morning, Miss Sinclair. What'll it be today?" Lydia pulled out her aunt's carefully written list. 20 pounds of flour, 5 pounds of sugar, coffee beans, salt pork, and some thread. She kept her voice soft, knowing it was better not to draw attention to herself. As Mr. Dawson gathered the items, Lydia noticed a group of young women her age by the fabric section, their heads bent together in conversation. One looked up, caught Lydia's eye, and whispered something that made the others giggle. Lydia turned away quickly, pretending to be fascinated by a display of canned peaches. "That'll be $2.35, Mr. Dawson said, placing the last of her items in a burlap sack. Lydia counted out the money carefully and reached for the heavy sack. "Need help carrying that back?" Mr. Dawson asked, though his tone suggested he was merely being polite rather than genuinely concerned. "No, thank you. I can manage," Lydia replied, hoisting the sack with effort. The bell jingled again as the door opened and a tall figure stepped inside, momentarily blocking the sunlight. Lydia didn't look up, focused on adjusting her grip on the heavy purchases. "Afternoon, Dawson," a deep voice greeted. "Got those fence staples I ordered?" "Just came in yesterday, Tucker." "Perfect timing," Mr. Dawson replied, his tone noticeably warmer than it had been with Lydia. As Lydia turned to leave, the heavy sack slipped from her grasp, spilling flour across the wooden floor. Mortification flooded through her as white powder billowed up in a cloud around her feet. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, dropping to her knees despite knowing her size made the movement ungraceful. She began frantically scooping flour back into the torn sack, aware of the stares and whispers around her. "Here, let me help you with that." The deep voice came from directly above her, and Lydia looked up to see the newcomer kneeling beside her, his strong hands already gathering the spilled goods. Tucker Kelly was perhaps the most striking man she had ever seen. His chestnut hair was slightly too long, curling beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and his eyes were the clear blue of a mountain lake. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his jaw, and despite the October chill, his skin was bronzed from working outdoors. "It's fine," she mumbled, embarrassed. "I can manage. 2 sets of hands work better than 1, he replied, his voice kind but matter-of-fact, Mr. Dawson hurried over with a broom. "Don't trouble yourself, Mr. Kelly. Miss Sinclair can clean up her own mess." Tucker looked up at the shopkeeper, his expression unreadable. "No trouble at all, Dawson. And I reckon that sack was already starting to tear when you handed it to her. Might want to be more careful with your packaging." Dawson's face reddened slightly. "I'll get a new sack," he muttered, retreating behind the counter. In moments, Tucker had helped gather the spilled goods into the replacement sack. As they both stood, Lydia was acutely aware of how she had to look up to meet his gaze, and how her substantial form contrasted with his lean, muscular frame. "Thank you," she said quietly, reaching for the sack. "You're staying at Martha Sinclair's boarding house, aren't you?" he asked, holding onto the supplies. "I've got my wagon outside. Let me give you a ride back." Lydia blinked in surprise. "That's very kind, but no trouble. I'm heading that direction anyway." His smile was easy, genuine in a way she wasn't accustomed to seeing directed at her. Before she could protest further, he had paid for his fence staples and was carrying her purchases out the door. Lydia followed, intensely aware of the stares following them. Outside, a sturdy wagon stood waiting, hitched to two well-groomed horses. Tucker loaded her supplies in the back and offered his hand to help her up to the seat. Lydia hesitated, acutely conscious of her weight and the strain it would put on both him and the wagon step. I'm rather heavy," she whispered, humiliated to have to say the words aloud. Tucker's expression didn't change. "And I'm rather strong," he replied simply. His hand remaining outstretched, with her heart hammering, Lydia placed her hand in his and allowed him to assist her onto the seat. The wagon dipped slightly under her weight, but Tucker made no comment, climbing up beside her with fluid grace. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he remarked as they set off, as casual as if he drove her around town every day. "First time the sun's been out all week." Lydia nodded, clutching her shawl around her shoulders, unsure what to make of this man who seemed determined to treat her like any other young woman. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he continued. "Tucker Kelly. I've got a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Lydia Sinclair," she replied softly. "Martha is my aunt." "Ah, that explains it. I've been wondering about the new face at the boarding house. Been in Durango long, 3 months. She stole a glance at his profile as he guided the horses through town. "My parents passed, and Aunt Martha was kind enough to take me in." "I'm sorry about your parents," he said, and the genuine sympathy in his voice caught her off guard. "It's not easy losing family." "No, it isn't," she agreed, surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. They continued down the main street, past the saloon and the sheriff's office, the blacksmith and the small church. Lydia was keenly aware of the curious looks from townspeople as they passed. Tucker Kelly was well known in Durango, respected for his successful ranch and his straightforward dealings. Lydia, on the other hand, was the overweight niece who had shown up on Martha's doorstep with nowhere else to go. "People talking doesn't bother me much," Tucker remarked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "Found out long ago that folks will talk no matter what you do, so might as well do what you please." Lydia smiled despite herself. "That's a luxury some of us don't have." "Not a luxury, Miss Sinclair. A choice." He glanced at her, his blue eyes serious now. "We all get to choose how much power we give to other people's opinions." Before she could formulate a response, they had arrived at the boarding house, a 2-story building with a wide porch and simple white curtains visible through the windows. Tucker jumped down from the wagon and came around to her side, once again offering his hand. This time, Lydia took it without comment, though she still held her breath as she descended, half expecting him to stagger under her weight. But his hand remained steady, strong and warm around hers. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Kelly," she said, letting go of his hand as soon as her feet touched the ground. Tucker, he corrected, retrieving her purchases from the back of the wagon. Mr. Kelly was my father, and he's been gone these past 5 years. Tucker, she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. And I'm Lydia. He smiled, the expression lighting up his face in a way that made something flutter in her chest. Pleasure to make your acquaintance, Lydia. The door of the boarding house opened, and Aunt Martha stood framed in the doorway, her thin face pinched with disapproval. Lydia, you've been gone an age. The noon meal needs preparing, and the West Room needs turning down for a new guest. Yes, Aunt Martha. I'm sorry for the delay, Lydia replied, the momentary lightness she'd felt in Tucker's company evaporating. There was an accident with the flour. Martha's frown deepened as she noticed Tucker standing beside her niece. Mr. Kelly, she acknowledged with a nod. I didn't realize you were acquainted with my niece. Just met today, Tucker replied easily, carrying the supplies up the steps. Had the pleasure of giving Miss Sinclair a ride back from Dawson's. Where would you like these, madam? Martha stepped aside, her expression softening slightly at Tucker's charm. In the kitchen, if you would. Tucker carried the supplies through to the kitchen and set them on the large wooden table that dominated the room. There you go, Lydia, he said, tipping his hat. Perhaps I'll see you around town. Thank you again, Lydia said, her eyes meeting his briefly before she looked away. As soon as Tucker had gone, Martha closed the door and turned to her niece. What was that about? Lydia busied herself unpacking the supplies. Nothing, he was just being kind. Martha murmured, clearly skeptical. Well, don't get any ideas. Tucker Kelly could have his pick of any girl in Durango. He's just the sort who feels obliged to help those less fortunate. The words stung, though they only confirmed what Lydia already knew. Men like Tucker Kelly didn't look twice at women like her, except out of pity. I'm not getting any ideas, Aunt Martha, she said quietly. Now, I'll start on lunch right away. As she worked, Lydia tried to push thoughts of Tucker Kelly from her mind. But his blue eyes and kind smile kept returning, along with the memory of his strong hand holding hers, making her feel, for just a moment, like she wasn't invisible after all. Over the next week, Lydia found herself watching for Tucker Kelly whenever she ventured into town. Though she chided herself for such foolishness, she couldn't help the way her heart quickened at the sight of any tall man in a wide-brimmed hat. But their paths didn't cross again, and she told herself it was for the best. The memory of their brief encounter would fade, along with the strange feeling it had awakened in her. Then, on a crisp Tuesday morning, as Lydia was hanging laundry in the yard behind the boarding house, she heard the distinctive sound of hoofbeats approaching. Peering around the billowing sheets, she saw Tucker dismounting from a magnificent chestnut horse. "Morning, Lydia," he called, tying his horse to the hitching post. "Beautiful day for laundry, I suppose." Lydia's hand stilled on the wet sheet she'd been about to hang. She was painfully aware of her appearance, hair pulled back in a simple bun, her largest dress already damp from the laundry, her face flushed from exertion. "Good morning," she replied, trying to sound composed. "Are you looking for my aunt? She's inside." "Actually, I came to see you," Tucker said, approaching the clothesline. "I brought something I thought you might like." From his saddlebag, he produced a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Wild honey," he explained as he handed it to her. "Found a hive on my property last week. Thought it might be nice for your baking." Lydia stared at the parcel, then back at Tucker, utterly perplexed. "You brought this for me. Is that so strange?" he asked, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yes," she answered honestly. "I mean, thank you, but why?" Tucker leaned against a porch post, looking completely at ease. "Why not? I had extra, and I remembered you mentioning you did the cooking here." Had she mentioned that? Lydia couldn't recall. Their conversation had been brief, yet apparently he had been listening carefully enough to remember such a detail. "That's very thoughtful," she said finally, clutching the honey to her chest. "I'll make something special with it." "I'll look forward to that," he replied. Then, glancing at the large basket of wet laundry still waiting to be hung, he added, "Need a hand? I'm decent at hanging things in straight lines." Lydia almost laughed at the absurdity of it, a successful rancher offering to help her hang laundry. "Don't you have a ranch to run?" "I've got good men working for me," Tucker replied with a shrug. "And sometimes it's nice to do something different." Before she could protest further, he had picked up a wet sheet and was shaking it out with practiced movements. Together, they worked in companionable silence, hanging the remaining laundry on the lines stretched across the yard. Lydia couldn't help noticing how efficiently Tucker worked, his strong hands making quick work of the task. "You've done this before," she observed as they hung the last of the linens. "My mother died when I was 14, Tucker replied matter-of-factly. "My father and I had to learn to manage for ourselves." He wasn't much for domestic tasks, so most of them fell to me until I was old enough to run the ranch alongside him. Lydia felt a surge of sympathy. "That must have been difficult." "It was," he acknowledged, "but it taught me not to think any task is beneath me. Work is work, whether it's branding cattle or hanging laundry." The door of the boarding house opened, and Aunt Martha appeared, her eyebrows rising at the sight of Tucker Kelly hanging sheets in her backyard. "Mr. Kelly," she said, clearly surprised. "I wasn't aware you were here." "Just lending a hand, Mrs. Sinclair," Tucker replied, tipping his hat to her. "Your niece has a lot on her plate." Martha's gaze shifted between them, confusion evident on her face. "Well, that's very neighborly of you." She turned to Lydia. "When you're finished here, there's bread to be baked and rooms to be cleaned." "Yes, Aunt Martha," Lydia replied, avoiding Tucker's eyes. After Martha had gone back inside, an awkward silence fell between them. Lydia fidgeted with a clothespin, suddenly very aware of how peculiar the situation was. "Your aunt works you pretty hard," Tucker observed, his tone neutral. Lydia shrugged. "She took me in when she didn't have to. The least I can do is earn my keep." "Fair enough," he conceded. "But everyone deserves some time to themselves." He hesitated, then added, "The fall festival is this Saturday. Will you be attending?" Lydia's heart skipped a beat at the question. The annual fall festival was Durango's biggest social event of the season, with dancing, games, and food aplenty. She had heard the other young women in town talking about their dresses and which young men they hoped would ask them to dance. I hadn't planned on it," she admitted. "I'll likely be helping Aunt Martha prepare rooms for the extra visitors in town for the festival." Tucker frowned slightly. "Surely you can spare a few hours in the evening. The dancing doesn't start until after sunset." The thought of dancing made Lydia's stomach clench with anxiety. "I don't dance," she said quickly. "And besides, I don't have anything suitable to wear." "You don't need fancy clothes to enjoy the festival," Tucker pointed out. "And not everyone dances. Some folks just come for the company and the apple cider." When Lydia didn't respond, Tucker added softly, "I'd like it if you came, Lydia." The simple statement caught her off guard. She looked up to find him watching her with those clear blue eyes, his expression open and earnest. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine it walking through the festival with Tucker Kelly, perhaps sampling Mrs. Peterson's famous apple fritters or watching the children bob for apples. But then reality reasserted itself. "People would talk," she said quietly. "Let them," Tucker replied without hesitation. "I meant what I said before about not giving power to other people's opinions." Lydia shook her head, unable to explain how different it was for her. Tucker, with his good looks and successful ranch, could afford to disregard gossip. But Lydia had spent her life being judged for her appearance, and she had learned that sometimes the only defense was to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. "I should get back to work," she said, picking up the empty laundry basket. "Thank you for the honey and for your help with the laundry." Tucker studied her for a moment, then nodded, accepting her unspoken refusal. "The offer stands if you change your mind. I'll be there from sundown until the last dance." With that, he tipped his hat and walked back to his horse. Lydia watched him go, telling herself it was better this way. Whatever Tucker's reasons for showing her kindness, allowing herself to hope for anything more would only lead to heartache. But as she went inside to begin baking, the jar of wild honey clutched in her hands, Lydia couldn't quite silence the small, persistent voice in her heart that whispered, "What if?" The day of the fall festival dawned clear and bright, with just enough chill in the air to warrant woolen shawls and jackets as evening approached. As predicted, the boarding house was full to capacity with visitors from neighboring towns and outlying farms. Lydia had been up since before dawn, preparing breakfast for the guests, changing linens and helping Aunt Martha with 100 small tasks. By late afternoon, her back ached and her feet were sore, but the work was mostly done. Sitting down at the kitchen table for a brief moment of rest, Lydia allowed her thoughts to drift to the festival. The town square would be decorated with autumn leaves and lanterns by now. Soon, the fiddler and his band would set up on the small wooden platform, and couples would gather for the dancing. "Are you planning to attend the festival, Lydia?" Aunt Martha's question pulled her from her reverie. Her aunt stood in the doorway, already dressed in her best dark blue dress, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a modest hat. "No, Aunt Martha," Lydia replied, rising from her chair. "I thought I would stay here in case any of the guests need anything." Martha pursed her lips. "The guests will all be at the festival. There's no sense in you sitting here alone." Lydia blinked in surprise. "You want me to go? I think you should," Martha said, her tone softening slightly. "You work hard, Lydia. A few hours of enjoyment won't hurt." Lydia hesitated, remembering Tucker's invitation. "I don't have anything suitable to wear." Martha studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Come with me." Lydia followed her aunt upstairs to Martha's bedroom. From a cedar chest at the foot of the bed, Martha withdrew a dress of deep burgundy wool, simply cut but with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "This was mine, many years ago," Martha explained, laying the dress on the bed. "It might need some adjustment, but I think it would suit you." Lydia touched the soft fabric, moved by the unexpected gesture. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Are you sure?" Martha nodded, her expression uncharacteristically gentle. "I've been hard on you, Lydia. Not because I don't care, but because this world is harder on women who don't fit its narrow expectations. I thought I was protecting you." "I understand," Lydia said, and she did. Martha's strictness had seemed cruel at times, but perhaps it had stemmed from her own experiences with a world that could be unforgiving. "Well," Martha said, clearing her throat as if embarrassed by the moment of vulnerability, "let's see if it fits, shall we?" With Martha's help, Lydia tried on the dress. It was a bit snug around the waist and chest, but not uncomfortably so, and the color brought warmth to her complexion. "We'll let out the seams a bit," Martha decided, already reaching for her sewing basket, "and perhaps add a panel at the sides. It won't take long." For the next hour they worked together on the dress, Martha's nimble fingers making quick work of the alterations while Lydia held pieces in place. When they had finished, Lydia put the dress on again and stood before the small mirror in Martha's room. The woman who looked back at her was still plump, with full cheeks and a substantial bosom, but there was something different about her. Perhaps it was the way the burgundy color highlighted the warmth in her brown eyes, or how the tailored waistline emphasized the natural curves of her figure instead of hiding them. "You look lovely," Martha said quietly, standing behind her. "Truly, Lydia." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes at the rare compliment. "Thank you, Aunt Martha." Martha helped her arrange her hair, pinning it up in a style more elegant than Lydia's usual practical bun, with a few soft curls framing her face. A touch of rose water at her wrists and throat completed the transformation. As the sun began to set, they walked together to the town square, where lanterns already glowed against the deepening blue of the sky. The square was crowded with familiar faces and visitors alike, all dressed in their finest clothes. Tables laden with food lined one side, while a space had been cleared in the center for dancing. Lydia's heart raced as they entered the festive atmosphere. Despite her aunt's kindness and the new dress, she still felt self-conscious, anticipating the stares and whispers that usually followed her. "Mrs. Sinclair, Miss Sinclair." Mrs. Peterson waved them over to a table where several other women from town were seated. "Come join us." Martha led the way and Lydia followed, grateful not to be standing alone. The women made room for them, and soon Martha was engaged in conversation about the upcoming winter and how it might affect business in town. Lydia sat quietly, sipping apple cider and watching the dancers. The fiddler struck up a lively tune and couples formed sets for a country dance. Children darted between the adults, playing tag and stealing cookies from the refreshment table. "He's looking for someone." Lydia turned to find Mrs. Peterson's daughter, Betsy, watching her with curious eyes. "Pardon?" Lydia asked, confused. Betsy, a pretty girl of 18 with blonde curls, nodded toward the edge of the square. "Tucker Kelly. He keeps scanning the crowd like he's looking for someone." Lydia's gaze followed Betsy's and her breath caught in her throat. Tucker stood beneath an oak tree, taller than most of the men around him, his strong profile illuminated by lantern light. He wore a clean white shirt beneath a dark vest, his usual work clothes replaced by more formal attire for the occasion. But his hair was still slightly too long, curling at his collar in a way that made Lydia's fingers itch to brush it back. As if sensing her gaze, Tucker turned, his eyes sweeping the crowd until they found her. The smile that spread across his face was like sunshine breaking through clouds, and he immediately began making his way toward her. "Looks like he found who he was looking for," Betsy murmured, sounding puzzled. Lydia couldn't respond, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain everyone around her must hear it. Tucker reached their table and removed his hat, revealing that unruly chestnut hair. "Evening, ladies." He greeted the table at large, but his eyes remained fixed on Lydia. "Miss Sinclair, you look beautiful tonight." A flush crept up Lydia's neck and into her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Kelly." "I was hoping you might honor me with a dance," Tucker continued, extending his hand. Lydia's momentary confidence faltered. I don't really dance," she stammered, acutely aware of the surprised looks from the women around the table. "Perfect," Tucker replied with a grin. "Neither do I. We can learn together." The band had just begun a new tune, slower than the previous one. Around them, couples were forming into a simple circle for a waltz, nothing too complicated or energetic. "Go on, Lydia," Aunt Martha urged quietly. "It's just a dance." Drawing a deep breath, Lydia placed her hand in Tucker's and allowed him to lead her to the edge of the dancing area. His hand was warm and calloused against her palm, steady as he turned to face her. "I really don't know the steps," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the music. "It's simple," Tucker assured her, placing one hand lightly at her waist while holding her right hand in his left. "Just follow my lead. One step back, two to the side, one forward." Hesitantly, Lydia placed her free hand on his shoulder, trying to ignore the whispers and stares around them. At first, her movements were stiff and awkward, her eyes fixed on her feet as she concentrated on not stepping on his toes. But gradually, as Tucker's gentle guidance continued, she began to relax into the rhythm. "There you go," he encouraged, his voice low and warm. "You're a natural, Lydia." She looked up at him then, skepticism clear in her expression. "You don't have to say that." "I never say things I don't mean," Tucker replied, his blue eyes holding hers steadily. "Another thing my father taught me." As they continued to dance, Lydia became aware of a strange sensation, a lightness in her chest, as if some weight she had carried for years was beginning to lift. Here, in Tucker Kelly's arms, moving to the sweet melody of the fiddle, she didn't feel invisible or out of place. She felt seen, truly seen, perhaps for the first time in her life. "Why me?" she asked suddenly, the question that had been burning in her mind since he had first helped her in the mercantile. Tucker's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean? Why are you being so kind to me? Why did you ask me to dance when there are a dozen prettier girls here tonight?" The dance brought them closer for a moment, and Tucker's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Because from the moment I saw you in Dawson's store, trying so hard to be invisible, all I could think was how much I wanted to see you smile. And because when you finally did smile, just before I left your aunt's place that first day, it was like watching the sun come out after a storm." Lydia stared at him, searching his face for any sign of mockery or pity, but found only sincerity in his clear gaze. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You will," Tucker promised, "if you'll give me the chance to show you." The music came to an end, and the dancers around them applauded the band. Tucker's hand remained at Lydia's waist for a moment longer than necessary before he reluctantly stepped back. "Would you like some cider?" he asked. "Or perhaps some of those apple fritters I've been smelling all evening?" Lydia nodded, still somewhat dazed by his words. Cider would be nice. They walked together to the refreshment table, where Tucker procured 2 cups of spiced cider. As he handed one to Lydia, a tall man with a silver star pinned to his vest approached them. "Evening, Tucker," the man greeted, tipping his hat to Lydia. "Miss Sheriff," Tucker replied. "Have you met Miss Lydia Sinclair? She's staying with her aunt at the boarding house." "Can't say I've had the pleasure," the sheriff said, offering his hand. "Sheriff James Hartford, madam." "Pleased to meet you, Sheriff," Lydia replied, shaking his hand. "Tucker here has been talking about you for weeks," the sheriff remarked with a sly glance at Tucker. "Wondered when I'd finally get to meet the lady who's had him so distracted." Tucker's neck reddened slightly above his collar. "Don't you have some law enforcing to do, Jim?" the sheriff chuckled. "Not much crime at a town festival, but I'll leave you to be." With a wink at Lydia, he sauntered off toward another group of townspeople. "Weeks?" Lydia echoed once the sheriff was out of earshot. Tucker ran a hand through his hair, looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Jim exaggerates. It's a lawman's prerogative, apparently." But Lydia wasn't fooled. "How long have you been watching me, Tucker Kelly?" He took a sip of his cider, then met her eyes directly. "Since the first week you came to town. I noticed you at church, sitting in the back row with your aunt. You were wearing a blue dress, and you kept your eyes down the whole service, except when Reverend Miller spoke about God seeing our true worth beyond our outward appearance. Then you looked up, and there was such hope in your eyes that it nearly took my breath away." Lydia remembered that sermon. She had clung to the Reverend's words in the difficult early days of her time in Durango, when the loneliness and stares had been hardest to bear. "I wanted to introduce myself then," Tucker continued, "but you slipped out before the final hymn, and I had to leave town for a cattle drive the next day. By the time I returned, I'd half convinced myself I'd imagined the girl with the sad eyes and the hopeful expression. Then I saw you again in Dawson's store. Lydia was speechless. All this time, while she had been trying to make herself invisible, Tucker Kelly had been seeing her. I know this must seem sudden to you, Tucker said quietly, and I don't mean to rush you or make you uncomfortable. But I'd like to call on you properly, if you'd allow it. Before Lydia could respond, a commotion across the square caught their attention. A group of cowboys from one of the larger ranches outside town had apparently been drinking heavily and were now getting rowdy, pushing each other and shouting near the band platform. Sheriff Hartford was already striding toward them, his hand on the butt of his pistol. "That's enough, boys," he called. "Take it outside the square if you can't behave." One of the cowboys, a burly man with a red beard, sneered at the sheriff. "Or what, Hartford? You gonna arrest the whole lot of us?" The tension in the air was palpable as the music stopped and people drew back, forming a circle around the confrontation. Tucker set down his cider cup, his body tensing beside Lydia. "Stay here," he murmured, then moved swiftly toward the sheriff and the drunken cowboys. "Need a hand, Jim?" Tucker asked, positioning himself at the sheriff's side. The red-bearded cowboy spat on the ground. "Well, if it ain't Tucker Kelly. Heard you've been making eyes at the fat girl from the boarding house. Guess even rich ranchers have to lower their standards sometimes." A hush fell over the crowd at the cruel words. Lydia felt as if she'd been doused in ice water, humiliation burning through her veins. She wanted to run, to hide, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. Tucker's face hardened, but his voice remained controlled. "You're drunk, Harlan. Go home before you say something else you'll regret when you're sober." "Or what?" Harlan taunted, swaying slightly on his feet. "You gonna defend her honor? Ain't much honor in a woman who eats enough for 3 men." Before anyone could react, Tucker's fist connected with Harlan's jaw, sending the drunken cowboy sprawling in the dirt. The crowd gasped, and Harlan's friends moved forward menacingly. "That's enough," Sheriff Hartford shouted, drawing his gun. "Next man who throws a punch spends the night in my jail. Harlan, you and your boys clear out now. Festival's over for you." For a tense moment, it seemed like Harlan might fight back, but after struggling to his feet and spitting blood onto the ground, he apparently thought better of it. "Come on, boys," he muttered. "This town's full of fools anyway." As the cowboys staggered away, Tucker turned, his eyes searching the crowd until they found Lydia. He started toward her, but the damage had been done. The cruel words had shattered the magical evening, reminding Lydia of the reality she had momentarily forgotten in Tucker's arms. Unable to face him or the pitying looks from the townspeople, Lydia turned and fled, tears blurring her vision as she pushed through the crowd. She heard Tucker calling her name, but she didn't stop, running through the darkened streets toward the boarding house, her borrowed dress clutched in her hands to keep from tripping. By the time she reached the sanctuary of her small room, Lydia was sobbing, great heaving breaths that shook her entire body. She collapsed onto her bed, burying her face in the pillow to muffle the sounds of her distress. Harlan's words had only given voice to what she had feared all along, that Tucker's attention was something to be mocked, that any connection between them was laughable to the rest of the world. How could she have been so foolish as to think, even for a moment, that someone like him could truly care for someone like her? A soft knock at her door made her start. "Lydia!" It was Aunt Martha's voice, concerned. "May I come in?" Hastily wiping her tears, Lydia sat up. "Yes," she called, her voice hoarse. Martha entered, her face drawn with worry. She sat beside Lydia on the narrow bed and, to Lydia's surprise, put an arm around her shoulders. "I'm so sorry about what happened," Martha said. "That Harlan Thompson has always been a nasty piece of work, even when sober." He only said what everyone was thinking, Lydia replied bitterly. Martha shook her head firmly. No, child. He said what he was thinking in his small, mean mind. And he paid for it with a bloody nose and a night of shame. It doesn't matter, Lydia said, wiping fresh tears. It's better this way. Now I won't make a fool of myself believing that someone like Tucker Kelly could actually, she broke off, unable to finish, could actually care for you. Martha finished gently. Lydia, that young man came looking for you the moment you ran off. He's downstairs right now, refusing to leave until he speaks with you. Lydia's head snapped up. He's here, Martha nodded. And judging by the look in his eyes, Harlan Thompson's words didn't change his feelings one bit. I can't see him, Lydia protested, gesturing to her tear-stained face. Not like this. Then wash your face and comb your hair, Martha said practically, rising from the bed. But see him you should. A man who defends your honor in front of the whole town deserves at least a chance to speak his piece. After Martha had gone, Lydia stood uncertainly in the middle of her room. Part of her wanted to hide under the covers until Tucker gave up and went away. But another part, a stronger part than she had realized existed, wanted to hear what he had to say. Moving to the basin on her dresser, Lydia splashed cold water on her face and patted it dry. She removed the burgundy dress, now creased from her flight and subsequent collapse on the bed, and changed into a simple blue dress, her everyday attire, but clean and presentable. After running a comb through her hair, which had mostly fallen from its pins during her run home, she took a deep breath and descended the stairs. Tucker stood by the fireplace in the small sitting room, his hat in his hands, his expression clearing into relief when he saw her. Lydia, he said, taking a step toward her before stopping himself. I was afraid you wouldn't come down. I almost didn't, she admitted, remaining by the foot of the stairs. I'm sorry about what happened, Tucker said, his voice low and intense. Harlan Thompson is a fool, and I should have controlled my temper better. Lydia shook her head. You have nothing to apologize for. It was kind of you to defend me, but it wasn't kindness, Tucker interrupted. It was anger, pure, simple anger that anyone would speak of you that way. He closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. Lydia, I need you to understand something. When I look at you, I don't see what Harlan sees or what you think the rest of the town sees. I see a woman of strength and grace, who carries herself with dignity despite the cruelty of others. I see kind eyes that light up when you talk about books, and hands that work tirelessly for others without complaint. Lydia's heart hammered in her chest, his words washing over her like a healing balm. How do you know I like books? She whispered. A small smile touched Tucker's lips. I asked about you. The Reverend's wife mentioned you borrowed books from her library. She said you have a particular fondness for Austen and the Bronte sisters. The thought that he had taken the trouble to learn such details about her was almost too much to comprehend. Tucker, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, he replied. Just don't shut me out because of what happened tonight. Don't let Harlan Thompson's ignorance rob us both of the chance to discover what might be between us. Lydia looked up at him, this man who had somehow seen beyond her physical appearance to the person she was inside. For so long, she had hidden herself away, convinced that her size made her unworthy of love or attention. But standing here, in the gentle lamplight of her aunt's sitting room with Tucker Kelly looking at her as if she were precious beyond measure, Lydia felt the walls around her heart begin to crumble. I'm afraid, she confessed softly. Afraid to hope, only to be disappointed. Afraid that one day you'll look at me and see what everyone else sees. Tucker reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. I can't promise we won't face more ignorance from people like Harlan, but I can promise that my eyes see clearly. Lydia Sinclair. And what they see is the woman I want to court properly, if she'll have me." His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "Will you let me call on you?" he asked. "Perhaps take you for a ride on Sunday after church, or join you for dinner one evening." Lydia took a deep breath, gathering courage she hadn't known she possessed. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd like that very much." The smile that broke across Tucker's face was like dawn breaking over the mountains. "Then I'll bid you good night, Miss Sinclair," he said formally, though his eyes danced with barely contained joy. "And look forward to seeing you at church tomorrow morning." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. Then, with a final smile, he placed his hat on his head and departed, leaving Lydia standing in the sitting room with her hand still tingling from his touch, and her heart lighter than it had been in years. Perhaps, just perhaps, being seen wasn't something to fear after all. True to his word, Tucker appeared at church the next morning, his hair still damp from washing and his Sunday best pressed to perfection. As Lydia and Martha entered the small white church, he was waiting on the steps, hat in hand. The sight of him waiting specifically for her, his face lighting up when he spotted her, sent a thrill through Lydia that she was still unaccustomed to. "Miss Sinclair, Mrs. Sinclair," Tucker greeted them both with a small bow. "May I escort you inside?" Martha raised an eyebrow but nodded her assent. Tucker offered an arm to each woman, and Lydia placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, acutely aware of the curious glances from the other churchgoers. But unlike yesterday's humiliation, today the stares felt different, less judgmental and more intrigued. News of Tucker's defense of her had apparently spread through town overnight, and Lydia found herself receiving nods and smiles from people who had previously looked through her. The Reverend's wife, Mrs. Miller, approached after the service to invite Lydia to the next meeting of the ladies' quilting circle, an invitation that had not been extended in the 3 months since Lydia's arrival in Durango. "Would you like to join me for dinner at my ranch next weekend?" Tucker asked as they stood in the churchyard after the service. "I'd like you to see the place, meet my foreman and his wife. She's an excellent cook, though I warned her not to try to compete with your baking skills." The invitation both thrilled and terrified Lydia. "I'd be honored," she replied, "though I'm not sure how I'd get there." "I'll come fetch you, of course," Tucker said as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Saturday at noon. We could take the long way around, make an afternoon of it." With Martha's approval secured, the plan was set. For the next week, Lydia found herself moving through her chores with newfound energy, her thoughts frequently drifting to Tucker and the upcoming visit to his ranch. He came by the boarding house twice during the week, once to bring a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, and once simply to sit with her on the porch as the sun set, talking of his day and asking about hers. Each visit peeled away another layer of Lydia's protective shell, revealing to her aspects of herself she had long suppressed: her quick wit, her observant nature, her capacity for joy. Tucker seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and experiences, and for perhaps the first time in her life, Lydia began to believe that her worth was not determined by the size of her body, but by the content of her character. Saturday dawned clear and mild for late October, with just enough chill to justify the new shawl Aunt Martha had helped her make during the evenings that week. Lydia dressed with special care in her best day dress, a deep green that brought out the auburn highlights in her brown hair. Martha had even surprised her with the gift of a small brooch to fasten at her collar, a simple silver piece with a small pearl at its center. "It was my mother's," Martha explained as she pinned it in place, "and now it's yours." Lydia touched the brooch gently, moved by the gesture. "Thank you, Aunt Martha, for everything." Martha's usually stern expression softened. "You deserve happiness, Lydia. I think perhaps Tucker Kelly understands that better than most." Tucker arrived precisely at noon, driving a smart buggy pulled by a matched pair of bays. He had clearly put as much thought into his appearance as Lydia had, wearing a crisp white shirt beneath a tailored vest, and his best boots polished to a shine. "You look beautiful," he said simply as he helped her into the buggy, his eyes warm with admiration. The journey to Tucker's ranch took them through rolling hills and stands of aspen trees, now golden with autumn color. As they traveled, Tucker pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area where he had tracked a mountain lion that had been preying on calves last winter, the creek where he had learned to fish as a boy, the distant peak where, legend had it, an old prospector had hidden a fortune in gold that had never been found. "There it is," he said finally, gesturing ahead as they crested a hill. The rocking quay, spread out below them, was a scene of pastoral beauty. A large two-story house of weathered wood and local stone stood at the center of a complex that included a barn, bunkhouse, corrals, and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. Smoke curled from the main house's chimney, promising warmth and hospitality within. "It's beautiful," Lydia breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "My father built the house when he married my mother," Tucker explained as he guided the horses down the slope toward the ranch. "He'd been living in a one-room cabin until then. Said my mother deserved better than dirt floors and a leaky roof." As they approached, a middle-aged couple emerged from the house onto the wide front porch. The man was tall and weathered, with graying hair and a mustache, while the woman was plump and pleasant-faced, her dark hair streaked with silver. "That's Frank Miller, my foreman, and his wife, Elena," Tucker explained. "They've been with the ranch since before my father died." "More family than employees, really." Frank and Elena welcomed them warmly, Elena immediately taking Lydia under her wing and leading her into the house while the men saw to the horses. "Tucker has told us so much about you," Elena said as she showed Lydia into a comfortable parlor. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the young lady who's caught his eye." The interior of the house was a pleasing blend of practicality and comfort. Sturdy furniture built to last shared space with touches of elegance, a crystal vase filled with late wildflowers, a beautifully woven Native American blanket draped over a reading chair, shelves lined with books. It was a home that spoke of both prosperity and unpretentiousness, much like its owner. "This is lovely," Lydia commented, noticing a painting of mountains above the fireplace. "Did you choose the decoration?" Elena smiled, pleased by the question. "Some of it. Mrs. Kelly, Tucker's mother, had wonderful taste. We've tried to keep much of what she selected." The painting was hers, brought all the way from Philadelphia when she married Mr. Kelly. Lydia moved to examine the painting more closely. "It's beautiful. Tucker mentioned his mother died when he was young." "Yes, consumption took her," Elena confirmed sadly. "She was a remarkable woman, educated, refined, but not too proud to learn ranch ways. Tucker has her eyes and her kindness." Before Lydia could respond, the men entered, bringing with them the scent of fresh air and leather. "Elena's been singing your praises, I see," Tucker remarked with a grin, noticing the two women deep in conversation. "Just getting acquainted," Elena replied with a wink at Lydia. "Dinner will be ready soon, but perhaps you'd like to show Miss Sinclair around the ranch first." Tucker offered his arm to Lydia. "Would you like a tour?" For the next hour, Tucker showed her the ranch, from the barn with its smell of hay and horses to the garden Elena maintained for fresh vegetables. He introduced her to the ranch hands they encountered, each of whom tipped his hat respectfully to Miss Sinclair. There was a sense of community here, of belonging that touched Lydia deeply. "And this," Tucker said finally, leading her to a small rise where a single oak tree stood, "is my favorite spot on the whole ranch." From the rise, they could see for miles in every direction the ranch buildings below them, the distant mountains, the vast sky overhead. A simple wooden bench had been placed beneath the oak, offering a place to rest and take in the view. "My father proposed to my mother here," Tucker explained as they sat on the bench. She'd come west somewhat reluctantly, leaving behind a comfortable life in Philadelphia to marry a rough cattleman she'd met during his one and only trip east. My father worried she regretted her decision. But he brought her to this spot one evening, and as the sun set, she told him she had never seen such beauty before, and that she knew then that this was where she belonged. Lydia could understand the feeling. There was a majesty to this land that spoke to something deep within her. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said softly. Tucker's hand found hers on the bench between them. "I wanted you to see it all where I come from, what matters to me. I know we haven't known each other long, Lydia, but I feel as though I've been waiting to meet you my whole life." The simple sincerity in his words took her breath away. For so long, Lydia had believed that her size made her unworthy of such devotion, that the best she could hope for was to be tolerated rather than treasured. But the way Tucker looked at her now, with tenderness and admiration in his clear blue eyes, made her wonder if perhaps she had been wrong all along. "I never expected any of this," she admitted. "When I came to Durango, I thought I would simply fade into the background, become my aunt's helper and nothing more. I was used to being overlooked." Tucker's fingers tightened around hers. "You could never be overlooked, Lydia, not by anyone with eyes to see." A call from the house interrupted the moment, Alina announcing that dinner was ready. As they walked back down the hill, hand in hand, Lydia felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her, like a flower turning toward the sun. Dinner was a joyful affair, with Alina's excellent cooking and Frank's dry humor creating an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. They ate in the spacious kitchen rather than the formal dining room, gathered around a large wooden table that Alina explained had been built by Tucker's father shortly after their marriage. "Tucker's made some improvements to the place," Frank remarked as they enjoyed slices of Alina's apple pie. "Expanded the herd, added the new barn, modernized some of the equipment, but he's always been careful to preserve what his parents built. This land has been in my family for 2 generations, Tucker explained. "I hope it will remain so for many more." After dinner, as the afternoon light began to fade, Tucker suggested they return to town. As much as Lydia would have liked to stay longer, she knew Martha would be expecting her, and the days grew dark early in late October. The journey back to Durango was made in comfortable silence, both of them reflecting on the day. As they reached the outskirts of town, Tucker slowed the horses to a walk, clearly in no hurry for their time together to end. "I'd like you to come again," he said. "Perhaps next time you could stay for supper as well. Alina mentioned teaching you her recipe for Spanish rice, if you're interested." "I'd like that very much," Lydia replied, touched that Alina had thought to include her in such a way. When they reached the boarding house, Tucker helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. In the gathering dusk, with only the light from the boarding house windows illuminating his face, his expression was one of tender seriousness. "Thank you for coming today," he said softly. "Seeing you at the ranch, meeting Frank and Alina, it meant a great deal to me." "Thank you for inviting me," Lydia replied, her voice equally soft. "It's a wonderful place, Tucker. You should be proud of what you've built there." Tucker's hands moved from her waist to gently take both of hers. "Lydia, I want you to know that he paused, seeming to search for the right words. My intentions toward you are serious. I don't want there to be any misunderstanding about that." Lydia's heart raced at the earnestness in his voice. "Tucker, you don't have to say anything now," he assured her quickly. "We have time. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Before she could respond, he bent and pressed a gentle, fleeting kiss to her cheek, his lips warm against her skin in the cool evening air. "Good night, Lydia," he whispered, then released her hands and stepped back. "Good night, Tucker," she replied, her cheek tingling from his kiss. As she watched him drive away, Lydia touched the spot where his lips had been, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. For the first time in her life, she was beginning to believe that perhaps happiness was not something that happened only to other people's slender, pretty people whose worth was evident at first glance. Perhaps it could happen to her too, a woman who had spent most of her life trying to be invisible only to discover the joy of being truly seen. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Lydia's life. Tucker called on her regularly, taking her for rides in his buggy when the weather permitted, bringing her books he thought she might enjoy, and once, memorably, arriving with a small box of chocolate creams from Denver, a luxury that left Lydia speechless with delight. The town of Durango gradually grew accustomed to the sight of them together. There were still whispers, of course, and occasionally pointed looks, but Tucker's open admiration and Lydia's growing confidence seemed to silence most of the critics. It helped that Harlan Thompson had left town shortly after the incident at the festival, hired on at a ranch near Wyoming, according to local gossip. November brought colder weather and the first dusting of snow to the mountains surrounding Durango. The boarding house was less busy as winter approached, giving Lydia more free time to spend with Tucker and to join in community activities. At Tucker's encouragement, she had begun attending the ladies' quilting circle, where she discovered a talent for the intricate stitchwork that impressed even the most experienced quilters. "You have an artist's eye for color and pattern, Mrs. Miller," the Reverend's wife, told her one afternoon as they worked together on a wedding quilt for a young couple in the congregation. "My mother taught me to sew when I was quite young," Lydia explained, pleased by the compliment. "It was one of the few activities we enjoyed together." As the Christmas season approached, Tucker invited Lydia to accompany him to Denver for a day to select gifts and enjoy the sights of the larger city. With Aunt Martha's somewhat reluctant blessing, they made the journey by train, spending a wonderful day exploring Denver's shops and restaurants before returning to Durango with their purchases carefully wrapped for the upcoming holiday. "I've never seen so many people in one place," Lydia remarked as they sat together on the train journey home, the winter landscape rushing past the windows. "Or so many different kinds of shops. Denver's growing fast," Tucker agreed. "Still not as grand as the cities back east, but it's becoming a proper metropolis." He hesitated, then added, "Do you miss Boston, Lydia?" The question made her pause and consider. "I miss certain aspects of it, the libraries, the theaters, some of the people I knew there. But Durango has become home in a way Boston never quite was. Here, I feel." She searched for the right word. "Seen," Tucker suggested softly. Lydia smiled, recognizing the truth in his observation. "Yes, seen. Not just looked at, but truly seen." Tucker's hand found hers on the seat between them, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become familiar and cherished over the past weeks. "I have something for you," he said. "I was going to wait until Christmas, but I find I don't want to wait any longer." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. Lydia's breath caught in her throat as he placed it in her palm. "Tucker, open it," he urged gently. With trembling fingers, Lydia lifted the lid to reveal a delicate gold brooch in the shape of a rose with a small pearl at its center. It was beautiful but not ostentatious, perfect for her sensibilities. "It's lovely," she whispered, touching it gently. "I noticed you always wear your aunt's brooch," Tucker explained. "I thought you might like one of your own as well. The shopkeeper said it was from France." Lydia was deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." Tucker helped her pin it to her collar, his fingers brushing against her skin in a way that sent warmth spreading through her. "There," he said, sitting back to admire the effect. "Beautiful, like its wearer." Lydia blushed, still not entirely accustomed to such direct compliments, though Tucker offered them freely and often. "You're very kind to me." "Not kind," Tucker corrected. "Honest. There's a difference, Lydia." As the train rattled through the winter landscape, Tucker's expression grew more serious. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said, his voice low enough that the few other passengers couldn't overhear. "Something important." Lydia's heart began to race. They had been courting for nearly 2 months now, and while Tucker had made his intentions clear from the beginning, neither had spoken directly of the future. "Christmas Eve is just 2 weeks away," Tucker continued. "I'd like you to spend it at the ranch with me, Frank, and Alina. But more than that." He took a deep breath. "Lydia, I'd like to ask for your hand in marriage, if you'll have me." Though she had begun to hope for such a proposal, the reality of it left Lydia momentarily speechless. Tucker Kelly, handsome, kind, respected, wanted to marry her. Her, Lydia Sinclair, who had spent most of her life believing herself unworthy of such happiness. "I know it hasn't been very long," Tucker said, misinterpreting her silence. "And if you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Lydia. I've known it since that day at the festival when I saw you in that burgundy dress, looking like a queen despite all the whispers around you. I want to build a life with you, have a family with you, grow old with you. If you'll have me," he repeated, his voice tinged with uncertainty now. "Yes," Lydia whispered, finding her voice at last. "Yes, Tucker, I'll marry you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise in the mountains, glorious and bright with promise. "You will?" Lydia nodded, her own smile widening. "I will. I love you too." Tucker glanced around the train car, clearly wishing for more privacy than their current situation allowed. But his joy couldn't be contained. Leaning forward, he pressed his lips to hers in their first real kiss, gentle but filled with promise. When they arrived back in Durango, Tucker insisted on accompanying Lydia to speak with Aunt Martha immediately. Despite the late hour, Martha received them in the sitting room, her eyebrows rising at their linked hands and flushed faces. "Mrs. Sinclair," Tucker began formally, "I've asked for Lydia's hand in marriage, and she has done me the great honor of accepting. I've come to ask for your blessing." Martha studied them both for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to Lydia's surprise, she smiled, a real smile that softened her usually stern features. "I believe you'll take good care of her, Mr. Kelly," she said. "And more importantly, I believe you see her for the remarkable woman she is. You have my blessing and my sincere wishes for your happiness." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparations and plans. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Durango, bringing a stream of well-wishers to the boarding house. The ladies of the quilting circle immediately began planning a wedding quilt, and Reverend Miller offered the use of the church for the ceremony, which they decided would take place in early spring when travel would be easier for Tucker's few relatives from distant parts. Christmas Eve found Lydia at the Rocking K Ranch, seated before a blazing fire in the main house, surrounded by Tucker, Frank, and Alina. They had exchanged gifts, practical items mostly, though Tucker had surprised her with a beautiful leather-bound journal, "For all your thoughts and dreams," as he put it. But the most precious gift of all was the sense of belonging, of family, that permeated the evening. After a sumptuous dinner, Frank and Alina tactfully retired to their quarters in a separate wing of the house, leaving Tucker and Lydia alone by the fire. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the landscape with white and muffling the night sounds of the ranch. "Happy?" Tucker asked, his arm around her shoulders as they sat together on the sofa. "More than I ever thought possible," Lydia replied honestly. "When I came to Durango, I thought I was just running away from a life that had become unbearable after my parents died. I never imagined I was running towards something so wonderful." Tucker's fingers traced gentle patterns on her arm. "I've been thinking about what you said on the train, about feeling seen here. I want you to know that I see all of you, Lydia. Not just your beauty, which is considerable, but your strength, your kindness, your intelligence, the way you care for others without expectation of return, the gentle way you have with children and animals, the determination with which you face challenges." His words warmed her more than the fire. "I spent so many years trying to be invisible," she confessed, "thinking that if people didn't notice me, they couldn't hurt me with their judgments. And now," Tucker prompted gently. Lydia smiled, leaning into his embrace. "Now I'm learning that being seen, truly seen by someone who loves you, is the greatest gift of all." Tucker bent to kiss her, a kiss that spoke of devotion and promises kept, of a future bright with possibility. "Merry Christmas, my love," he murmured against her lips. "Merry Christmas, Tucker," she whispered back. "The first of many." Winter gave way to spring, and with the melting of the snow and the first wildflowers dotting the hills around Durango, preparations for the wedding intensified. Lydia, with Alina and Martha's help, created a wedding dress of cream-colored silk with delicate lace trim, a dress that celebrated rather than disguised her curves. The ladies of the quilting circle completed a magnificent wedding quilt in shades of blue and green that reminded Lydia of the view from Tucker's favorite oak tree at the ranch. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, a perfect April morning with birds singing and the scent of new growth in the air. As Lydia prepared in one of the rooms of the church, surrounded by the women who had become her friends over the past months, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the radiant woman who looked back at her. Gone was the hunched posture and downcast eyes. In their place was a woman who stood tall, who met the world's gaze with confidence born of being truly loved. "You look beautiful," Aunt Martha said softly, adjusting the veil in Lydia's hair. The brooch Tucker had given her at Christmas was pinned at her collar, while Martha's pearl brooch adorned the sash at her waist, old and new together. "Thank you," Lydia replied, squeezing her aunt's hand. "For everything, Aunt Martha. For taking me in when I had nowhere else to go, for your guidance, for your blessing on this marriage." Martha's eyes glistened with unusual moisture. "You've brought life back to that old boarding house, Lydia, and to this old woman as well. I'm proud of the person you've become." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion for Lydia. She would later remember the look on Tucker's face as she walked down the aisle on the arm of Reverend Miller, standing in for her deceased father. The warmth of Tucker's hands holding hers as they spoke their vows, and the tenderness of his kiss as they were pronounced husband and wife. But the details, the exact words spoken, the hymns sung, those faded into the background of the overwhelming joy of the day. The celebration afterward, held in the town square under a canopy of spring leaves, was attended by what seemed like the entire population of Durango. Even Mrs. Dawson from the Mercantile, who had once been so dismissive of Lydia, approached to offer congratulations and a gift of fine linens for their home. "The ranch is going to seem very different with a mistress again," Frank remarked to Lydia during the festivities, his weather-beaten face softened with genuine pleasure. "It's been too long since there was a woman's touch in that house." "I hope I can live up to the legacy of Tucker's mother," Lydia replied, glancing across the square to where her new husband was deep in conversation with the sheriff. "You already have," Frank assured her. "Mrs. Kelly was a fine woman, but you've brought something special to Tucker's life." "I've never seen him so happy." As the celebration continued into the evening with dancing and feasting under the stars, Lydia found moments of quiet joy amidst the excitement. The way Tucker's hand found hers whenever they were separated for more than a few minutes. The proud smile on Aunt Martha's face as she watched her niece dancing with her new husband. The genuine warmth with which the townspeople, many of whom had once whispered behind her back, now embraced her as Mrs. Tucker Kelly. Later that night, as they drove back to the ranch, now her home as well as Tucker's, Lydia reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the lonely, self-conscious young woman who had arrived in Durango just 9 months ago to the confident, loved bride she was today. It seemed almost like a dream. "What are you thinking about?" Tucker asked, his arm around her shoulders as he guided the horses with one hand. "About how much has changed," Lydia replied, leaning into his warmth. "About how lucky I am." Tucker's arm tightened around her. "I'm the lucky one, Lydia Kelly. Don't ever forget that." The days and weeks that followed were a time of adjustment and discovery as Lydia settled into her role as mistress of the Rocking K. There were challenges, of course, learning to manage a household staff, becoming familiar with the rhythms of ranch life, finding her place in the partnership that was her marriage to Tucker. But through it all, Tucker's unwavering support and obvious adoration made even the difficult moments bearable. By summer, Lydia had transformed the main house with small touches that reflected her personality while honoring the history of the place. Fresh curtains at the windows, new cushions on the furniture, flowers from her expanded garden on the tables. The ranch hands quickly grew accustomed to her presence, tipping their hats respectfully when they encountered her and eagerly accepting the occasional treats she baked for them. In July, as they celebrated their 3rd month of marriage with a special dinner cooked by Alina, Lydia shared the news she had been saving for this moment. "I have something to tell you," she said as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and pink. Tucker turned to her, his expression curious. "What is it, love?" Lydia took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly. "In February, according to Dr. Wilson." For a moment, Tucker seemed frozen, his eyes widening as he processed her words. Then a smile broke across his face, so full of joy and wonder that it brought tears to Lydia's eyes. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hushed with awe. "Our baby," Lydia nodded, her own smile matching his. "Our baby." Tucker gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, "more than I can ever express." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, Lydia's body changed with the seasons. Her pregnancy brought a new roundness to her already substantial form, but for perhaps the first time in her life, she felt no shame in her size. There was beauty in the swell of her stomach that cradled their growing child, and Tucker's obvious pride in her condition only reinforced that feeling. He insisted on hiring additional help at the ranch so that Lydia wouldn't overtax herself, though she assured him she was perfectly capable of continuing most of her regular activities. Dr. Wilson, who visited monthly to check on her progress, confirmed that both mother and child were in excellent health. "You're made for childbearing, Mrs. Kelly," he remarked during one visit. "Strong and healthy with good wide hips. You'll deliver this baby with no trouble, I expect." On a snowy evening in late February of 1880, as a winter storm howled around the ranch house, Lydia's labor began. Elena, who had assisted at many births during her years in the territory, took charge of the practical arrangements while Tucker, despite tradition dictating that men should keep their distance during childbirth, refused to leave Lydia's side. "I won't have her face this alone," he told Dr. Wilson firmly when the physician arrived through the blizzard. "She's my wife, and that's my child." Dr. Wilson, a progressive man who had trained in Philadelphia before coming west, merely nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Kelly. Just stay out of my way when necessary." The labor was long and difficult, despite Dr. Wilson's earlier optimism. As the night wore on and Lydia's strength began to flag, Tucker's presence became her anchor. He wiped her brow, held her hand through contractions, and murmured words of encouragement and love that gave her the strength to continue when she thought she could bear no more. Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, their son entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears of joy to both parents' eyes. "A fine, strong boy," Dr. Wilson announced, placing the swaddled infant in Lydia's arms after Elena had cleaned and wrapped him. "Congratulations to you both." Lydia gazed down at her son's tiny face, overcome with a love so profound it seemed to fill every corner of her being. He had Tucker's chestnut hair and clear eyes, though the doctor warned that the eye color might change in the coming months. "He's perfect," she whispered, tracing a finger along his velvet cheek. "Like his mother," Tucker replied, his voice thick with emotion as he sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Lydia's shoulders and the other gently supporting their son. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names during the long winter evenings but had not settled on a final choice. Now, looking at their son's face, Lydia knew. "James," she said, "after your father, and Thomas as a middle name after mine." "James Thomas Kelly," Tucker repeated, testing the name. "A good, strong name for a good, strong boy." He bent to kiss his son's forehead, then turned to place an equally tender kiss on Lydia's lips. "Thank you," he whispered, "for our son, for our life together, for everything." As the first rays of sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the new family in its golden glow, Lydia felt a sense of completion she had never known before. In Tucker's eyes, in the precious weight of their son in her arms, she saw not just her present happiness, but the promise of all the days to come. Days filled with love and challenge, with joy and occasionally sorrow, but always with the certainty of being truly seen and cherished for exactly who she was. The years passed, bringing changes and growth to the rocking K and to the Kelly family. James, or Jamie as they called him, grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's adventurous spirit and his mother's compassion. When he was 3, a sister joined the family, Elizabeth Martha Kelly, named for both grandmothers. She had Lydia's brown eyes and Tucker's determined chin, and from the moment she could toddle, she followed her big brother everywhere. Lydia found that motherhood suited her as naturally as marriage had. Her comfortable lap was always ready for a child in need of comfort, her strong arms capable of both work and embraces. The rocking K became known not just for its fine cattle and well-managed lands, but for the warmth of its hospitality and the happiness of its family. Aunt Martha, who had initially been skeptical about Lydia's ability to manage both a ranch and a family, became a frequent visitor and an adoring grandmother figure to the children. The boarding house in town was now run by a younger cousin from back east, who had followed Lydia's path to Colorado, leaving Martha free to divide her time between town and ranch as she pleased. Tucker's fortunes continued to prosper. With Frank's help, he expanded the ranch's operations, experimenting with new breeding techniques and modern farming methods. The rocking Caticus reputation grew beyond Durango, bringing buyers from as far away as California and opportunities for further expansion. Through it all, Tucker and Lydia's partnership remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. They faced challenges together: droughts that threatened the cattle, a winter so severe it claimed a quarter of their herd, Jamie's serious illness, when he was 5, that left the entire household holding its breath for days, until the fever broke. But they also shared countless moments of joy, from watching their children's first steps to celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary with a renewal of vows that left not a dry eye in the church. On a warm summer evening in 1890, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching their children play with the puppies born to their favorite cattle dog, Tucker reached for Lydia's hand, a gesture as familiar and necessary as breathing after 12 years of marriage. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked, his voice soft with reminiscence. "In Dawson's store with the flour all over the floor," Lydia smiled, squeezing his hand. "How could I forget? I was mortified. And then this handsome rancher knelt down to help me, and I thought surely he must be pitying the fat, clumsy girl." Tucker shook his head, his expression serious despite the years that had passed since that day. "I saw you long before that, Lydia. Watching you move through town, trying so hard not to be noticed. I saw your kindness to old Mrs. Peterson when she dropped her package outside the church. I saw your patience with the Miller children when they ran wild in the mercantile. I saw your grace, your dignity, your strength. I saw you." Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes, though they were tears of gratitude rather than sadness. "And you made sure I knew I was seen. Every day, in 1,000 small ways, you showed me that I mattered. You changed my life," Tucker said simply. "Before you, the ranch was just land and cattle and work. You made it a home. You gave me a family. You taught me what it means to truly love someone with all their complexities and contradictions." "We changed each other," Lydia corrected gently. "You gave me the courage to stop hiding, to embrace life instead of merely enduring it. You helped me see that my worth wasn't determined by my size or others' opinions, but by the capacity of my heart and the strength of my character." From the yard came the sound of children's laughter as Jamie, now 10, showed 5-year-old Elizabeth how to throw a stick for the puppies to chase. The sound mingled with the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind in the cottonwoods, and the soft creaking of the porch swing where Tucker and Lydia sat, the soundtrack of a life rich in love and purpose. "You ever regret it?" Tucker asked suddenly. "Coming west, ending up in Durango of all places. You could have had a different life in Boston, with libraries and theaters and all the things a woman of your education appreciates." Lydia turned to him, her expression one of gentle exasperation at the unnecessary question. "Tucker Kelly, in all our years together, have I ever given you reason to think I wasn't exactly where I wanted to be?" He smiled, acknowledging the truth in her words. "No, you haven't." "Then let me say it plainly, once more," Lydia said, leaning forward to place a soft kiss on his lips, still as compelling to her now as they had been when they first married. "I am exactly where I belong, with exactly the man I was meant to love, living exactly the life that brings me joy. I wouldn't change a single moment of our journey together, not even the difficult ones, because they all led us here." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tucker and Lydia Kelly sat together on their porch, hands intertwined, watching their children play in the yard of the home they had built together. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but recognition of their true selves. A cowboy who had seen beyond appearances to the heart of a woman who thought herself invisible. A woman who had learned that being seen truly, deeply seen was not a cause for fear, but the greatest blessing life could offer. In each other's eyes, they had found home. And in that home, they had found the courage to be exactly who they were meant to be together.